Welcome, Campfire Crew, to Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you're not following me on social media, be sure to follow the links in the description below for updates on everything that's happening on this channel. Quick shout out to Joanne and Alexa for being my latest patrons, and if you would like to be a patron, my Patreon account is also linked in the description below. Everybody, sit back and relax. Let's get it on. Get everyone outside. One of the creepiest things happened to me when I did my basic military training at Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri. Our barracks were old, dating to around the 50s or 60s, and every night a number of recruits were assigned fire guard duty, which was essentially trying to stay awake for an hour and mopping the floor, or buffing it, until the next soldier came on duty. The fire guard post for my platoon was at one end of a long hallway, directly under a set of speakers suspended from the ceiling. Whenever the drill sergeants made an announcement, you'd hear them through the speakers, and this is how they communicated reveille and other instructions where they had to talk to the entire building all at once. Usually, these were communicated in blistering shouts and rendered staticky and nearly unintelligible as they blared through the ancient sound system. One night, about halfway through basic, so sleep deprivation really hit hard by this point, I was sitting in a chair under the speakers, trying to stay awake. The speakers crackled to life, and I immediately perked up. Unusual for an announcement this time of night, but it wasn't outside the realm of possibility. The voice was soft, barely above a whisper, and a woman's voice said, "Private. Get everyone outside, right now." The comm line remained open with a low hum hissing through it, and the voice said again, "Right now, Private. Everyone outside." Yeah, weird. Not weird that it was a woman's voice. It was a co-ed basic training and we had a couple of female drill sergeants, but for it to come across so softly was really strange. When the brown rounds used the intercom, it was usually in full shouting voice. So I headed down the length of the hall to where the 2nd platoon had a fire guard on duty, and similarly situated. I asked him if he had heard anything, and he got a negative response. I made a decision. I'd chalk it up to my imagination and tiredness, and not risk having the entire barracks furious at me for disturbing their sleep in error. If it was one of the drill sergeants messing with me, and I got in trouble for not waking everyone up, hey, at least I'd be the only one getting smoked. Nothing happened the rest of the night, and I put it out of my mind until the very end of basic, when we had our 3-day field training exercise. We made it through, and the drills started treating us like real humans, almost. As we completed the last day of the exercise, which was a near-live fire night march to attack scenario, we all gathered around the fire. The drills got to talking, and then got to telling stories. Then they got to telling ghost stories about the base. My drill told the story of the first female drill sergeant on Fort Leonard Wood. Can't remember when it was the 70s or 80s, but it was decades ago. Apparently, she faced a lot of pressure and harassment, as you can imagine. It was unrelenting and harsh, and apparently she couldn't handle it. She'd hung herself from some exposed water pipes using her belt. A few years later, they'd plastered over the exposed pipes so they could mount speakers where she hung herself. The President's Office by Gug Graves. Around 12 years ago, I was working security at a small company's headquarters in New York City. My partner for the night had called in sick, so I had to work from midnight to 6 all by my lonesome. Now, normally, this wouldn't be a problem. I just had to sit in the back room, watch some cameras, and occasionally head out for a sweep. Nothing to it, right? Well, as it turns out, one of the employees had stayed in the building after hours and had managed to avoid my coworker's sweep from the previous shift. I first noticed a movement in my peripheral vision on one of the screens, and then again a few minutes later. This was odd because I was used to quiet nights in this particular building. I was a little scared when I headed out for my sweep, but it was my job, so I grabbed my flashlight and headed out to begin. I had to start the sweep in one big hallway, and right as I entered, I saw a flash of movement at the end of it. At this point, I was sufficiently freaked out, and I stood frozen for a minute or so, looking into the semi-darkness, unsure of what I should do. The decision was taken out of my hands, however, as I heard a gunshot resound down the hallway. In what was the scariest moment of my life, I slowly walked down that hallway to investigate. I reached the end and saw to my left that the president's office light was on. Slowly, I approached the door and creaked it open, scared shitless. What I saw will forever haunt me. The man had taken a seat in the president's chair and shot himself in the head with a pistol, splattering blood and brains all over the floor and the wall. Apparently, this guy was having problems at home, and because the president was supposedly a total asshole to him, he decided to off himself and scare the crap out of the president at the same time. In any case, I threw up a few times and called the police. I got the next 2 weeks off, and I still have nightmares about this. Knocking on the glass. When I was a young teenager, I had a commercial cleaning gig with my parents as the night shift guys, and you can imagine the creepy stuff that I saw. The restaurant I worked in was located in a fairly busy area of town in a mini strip mall, so we weren't really concerned about security, since there was always a patrolling night guard riding around the strip, making sure that there was no trouble. Well, this particular night, it was just myself and my mother cleaning in one of our nightly buildings by ourselves, while my dad and sister were doing the other one across town. Everything was going smoothly until my mom realized she had left our new box of Tide, we used it on the kitchen floors, outside in the truck. Me, being unfazed by the aspect of being alone outside at 1 a.m. in the morning, chose to go get it, and right when I was locking the door to the truck and inching my way back inside, I noticed a guy standing across the parking lot, just staring at me. He wasn't moving or anything like that. He was just staring. It was so creepy, so I merely walked back inside and made sure that the door was locked before continuing to do my business. When I moved out of the kitchen into the front dining area to begin mopping, that's when I noticed the creeper dude was now standing beneath the front door awning outside, staring into the glass, staring at me. The dude particularly screamed homeless with his disheveled clothes and long, stringy hair and thick, wild beard. But honestly, it was his eyes that really freaked me out. I can only describe them as utterly soulless. Beginning to get a bit freaked out, but not wanting to be rude, I gave him a quick glance before going back to my work, but before I could really do it, he started slowly and almost rhythmically pounding on the glass with his fists, still staring intently at me all the while. At this point, I was pretty much done with trying to be patient with him and promptly yelled at him to get lost. My mom heard me yelling from the kitchen and came out to see just what was going on, and I told her while pointing at the man. The moment that I did, though, I saw my mom blanch and then slowly begin to back away. She grabbed my wrist and urged me to do the same, but wouldn't let me turn around to see what was up. We reached the back stockroom of the restaurant and stayed there while Mom called the strip security guard to let him know what was going on. Later that evening, after the security guard came and checked the place, he said there was no sign of the guy, but there, at the front door of the restaurant, he found a discarded straight razor lying in the middle of the pavement, and another in the bushes at the place that he had been pounding on the glass. My mom said that when I yelled out and looked away from him, he had grinned at her both and I, and held up the big knife and tapped it against the glass. We no longer work nights, but still, whenever we do get the occasional call for a deep clean, I always have my own weapons with me, just in case. My time at a taxi company. I just finished my first year of university, and I had taken up a position as a taxi dispatcher with my boyfriend's cousin's taxi company. For the first week and a half, I worked mainly day shifts until the owner decided to extend the hours to 24/7, and I was the lucky employee covering 3 to 4 of these shifts a week. The next week after they started the whole 24/7 thing, I was working my first night shift alone. Taxi drivers doing the night shift were all out looking for fares, which meant a lot of the night would just be me sitting there doing dispatch stuff. I was a bit uneasy working such a shift by myself, but since I had worked at a 24-hour coffee shop, I was kind of used to working the midnight shift. It was also a Wednesday or a Thursday night, so I figured that it wouldn't be very busy. Looking back, I guess the best part about this job was that my boss let me use the internet to play video games on my laptop in the office, which is where I was always stationed. From the computer desk in the office, I could see the front door, a portion of the front desk, and most of the front windows, so I could keep a close eye on what was happening outside. There was a light above the door that always alerted me to a new customer, so I wouldn't be caught off guard if I got too into my game. On this particular night, I was working with a taxi driver named Dave, who was about 6'3" and 300 pounds. He suffered from several physical issues, one of which meant movements were long and painful for him, and he definitely wasn't Mr. Fitness or the type of person who would be able to defend himself or others very easily. But at least he looked like he could. Sometime during the early hours of the morning, at about 1:30 or 2 a.m., Dave got a call to go pick up someone in a town 15 minutes away. He gathered up his stuff and drove into the night, while I headed into the office and continued playing a video game. About 15 minutes later, I caught something over the top of my laptop, and my mind froze. I could hear panting, and in the reflection of the window, I could see someone sitting in one of the waiting chairs. I walked to the doorway that connects the front room of the office, and I glanced into the sitting area, shitting bricks. Some guy with a massive rat tail had managed to ninja his way into the office, and was now sitting in one of the chairs with his face buried in his hands, panting heavily. He was dirty, sweating, and sounded like he had just run a marathon. Now, the rat tail should have tipped me off, but I found it more hilarious than frightening at the time. A few moments passed, and I finally got up the courage to ask him if he needed a cab. He didn't respond at first, so I asked him again. He looked up at me. I took a step back into the office. His face was scratched and covered in blood from the wound on the top of his head. I was shocked and immediately offered assistance to him, but he only replied, "I'm fine. I don't need no help. I just want to go home." I asked him if he needed a cab, and if so, where he was going. He told me he lived 20 minutes away and wanted someone to take him home. After this, shit started to get weird. I called to Dave using the radio to tell him that there was a fare in the office, and the guy wanted a ride. And he told me he'd be another 10 minutes. My hand was on the phone the entire time in case this guy made any sudden moves. Instead of going back into the office, I decided it was best to stay out front where there are two great big bay windows that would make it easy to see what's happening inside the taxi office. I didn't feel as though he was a threat at all to me, but he seemed really angry about something, so I wanted to make sure that if something did happen, people outside would be able to see it. I walked out into the front room, and as I got closer to this gentleman, that's when I saw it. He wasn't just bleeding from the head, but also from the shoulder and his knee. I asked him again if he was okay, and if I could call him an ambulance. Bad idea. You don't need to be doing that. It ain't like I killed nobody, right? I never killed nobody. Don't go doing that. You don't need to call anyone. I just want to go home. I responded with, I'm sorry, I just noticed that you're bleeding pretty badly and thought maybe you would like someone to make sure you're okay. I thought it was a fair thing to say, but he said back, I didn't kill nobody. That asshole should have kept his mouth shut. He had what was coming to him, but it ain't like I killed nobody. You don't need to call nobody. I just want to go home. Okay, I said to him, but you're bleeding. And guess what he said? Yep. It ain't like I killed nobody. I swear I didn't kill nobody. Please, don't call the cops. I don't need the cops. I just need to go home. I didn't kill anyone. Silence for a moment. He noticed the phone clutched in my hand. I fell down, he blurted out. Excuse me? I said, and he said it again. I fell. That's why I'm bleeding. I fell. I didn't kill nobody. He got up and started pacing. He was growing impatient for his cab, and I was scared shitless. Blood was now all over the chair and floor, and I had the phone in my hand, and every once in a while he broke the silence with another string of incoherent babbling about how he had done nothing wrong because he had never killed anyone, and how I didn't need to call the cops because he was a good guy. Eventually, Dave radios over that he's about 2 minutes away, and I breathe a sigh of relief. He pulled up out front. The man got into his car, and they drove off. But now, I was worried for Dave, so I called the cops and reported what had happened, and they followed the taxi cab to this guy's house where they arrested him. Turns out, this guy had run away from a nearby bar after he had physically assaulted a fellow patron. To what extent, I never found out, but apparently he had injured him with a sharp object, like a pocket knife or a needle or something. Then he took off running, fell down, and then managed to find his way to our taxi office. During his time in the cab office, the police had been searching for him, so technically no, he didn't kill anyone, but he had assaulted someone. I also found out that one of the other drivers, Steven, knew the guy from high school years ago. His name was Duke, and not surprisingly, he had a history of violence. He also had a history of coming home drunk, and he liked to beat his wife from time to time. Whether he had planned to do that this night, I couldn't say, but I'm just glad that that guy ended up in the drunk tank for the night. His wife was unharmed, and the guy who got stabbed did not die. To this day, I still see Duke every now and then, walking the streets, with his glorious rat tail. Hey gang, thanks for listening to Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. I know this was a short episode, but I've got a lot going on in my personal life, but I still wanted to make sure that we had a Thursday update. I also have something else that I'm probably going to release in the next day or two. It's something I've never done before, so please be sure to let me know how you feel about me doing stuff like this. You'll see when you actually hear it. Please like, share, and subscribe to this channel, and when you do subscribe, make sure you click on the little bell so you'll make sure that you get all of the notifications when I upload. If you like to hear these episodes in podcast format, you can find past episodes at Spreaker, iTunes, TuneIn, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and more. I'm still looking for your scary Halloween stories, so please send those to, as well as any other scary stories that you have, to unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. And we are still on tap for a live virtual campfire next Thursday, October 18th, if all goes well. We'll be taking your calls and your stories, but I have a very special guest, a Native American lorist that you guys will love. He's an Algonquin healer and elder, and he is ready to talk all things paranormal and supernatural in the Native American world. Everybody, be excellent to each other, and I will see you next time. But until then, remember, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.